Okay, everybody, welcome to this episode of Alan Carroll's famous podcast of life. This is, I believe, episode 7. Sometimes I move the episodes around, but I think this is episode 7, or it's going to be episode 7. And I'm really delighted to be talking to a friend of mine who I've known for the past few years, and a colleague. I've done work with him as well. It's a gentleman called Tim Zwart. Now, Tim is a multifaceted and multi-talented person, and I have experienced his work firsthand. It's really top notch. And Tim has been a writer. He's edited various magazines. We worked in some magazines together ourselves. He's worked in the online marketing sector, in terms of SEO, copy. He'd be a copy expert. He's also written a book, which I actually have in my Kindle library, I'm pretty sure. I think I bought it, Tim, called Reload, which I think is changing the way we view guns in America, I think. Did I get that title correct?
Correct.
Awesome.
And thank you for having me.
Awesome. So Tim is a tiny little bit more about Tim. Tim is, for me, a really interesting character. He was born in the United States and lived some of his life on the eastern seaboard, the New York side of the country. Some of his time he lived in the more southerly states. And in 2003, he moved to Canada, Ontario in Canada, and has lived here ever since, with his family, his kids. And I think he's put down roots here. He might tell me now I'm moving next week to outer Mongolia. I'm not sure, who knows. So welcome, Tim, to the podcast.
Thank you, Alan. Very nice to be with you.
Good, awesome. So it's great to talk to you. As I've said on a few of my podcasts, that it's amazing what a pandemic does in terms of making us reach out to the people we haven't spoken to in a while. So that's really good. I've reconnected with people.
It's amazing how meaningful conversations come from isolation and boredom.
Yes, and looking at the wall, and maybe I'm going to say, I'm not going to cast aspersions on your character, but maybe, drinking a bit too much alcohol, and spending a bit too much time with the family and the kids, and looking for some way to speak to somebody else.
Yeah.
So how have you been during this crazy time, Tim?
Oh man, it's been interesting to say the least. I mean, I'm sure everybody kind of has a similar story, just going through the whole pandemic in general. But it's really something you find out when there's no school and there's no daycare and there's no outlets for you to do. I mean, I'm a single father and I have my kids. I have a 7-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. And I love spending time with them, but it's when there's no other place for them to go, sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming. And we're in a one and a half bedroom condo in Toronto, my girlfriend and I. And we have the kids about 50% of the time. And every morning we start the day with, we wake up and she's still going to work as well. And we wake up and say, what's your schedule for today? What do you have conference calls? Do you have meetings? Do you have to talk on these meetings? Are you just listening? And then we try and organize what part of the house we're going to set up in based on those answers.
That's actually really interesting. And it's such a real life and so indicative of what everybody's kind of doing. So are you working from home, still working from home?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to do that since really the pandemic started. So just before March break for the kids. So nothing's changed with my work schedule. If anything, I've been working more because I find myself, when you're sitting around and you don't have anything to do and you know that there's stuff to get done, you just hop on the computer for a little bit and catch up on some things. But I've been working at home pretty much full time since the middle of March. So
yeah, I've spoken to some people. Excuse me, I'll try that again. Chop that piece out. Yeah, so I've spoken to some people, over the past while and read some articles online, and there's definitely has been a kind of a seismic shift in terms of companies being more open to have employees and colleagues working from home. Where I think in the past there was probably a bit of a stigma, probably an old-fashioned way of looking at things in terms of, oh, if somebody's at home, they're not going to do as much work, which is kind of doesn't really make sense in any way, because who watches everybody all the time, even if they're in an office? So it doesn't kind of make sense.
Right. Yeah.
But I think what the anecdotal evidence, certainly haven't seen any scientific evidence, but the anecdotal evidence seems to point to the fact that people are actually a bit more productive. And to your very words, that you haven't got the big commute, you haven't got the stress of trying to figure out with kids, schools, all that stuff. You can deal with things at home if there's any issues with kids and family. So that's great, because it's nothing worse than being at work and then having to I don't know, manage your kids from a distance, or school or anything like that. So I think that's been a big boon for people. Certainly the commute to and from, especially if you're living in the Greater Toronto area, the commute could be absolutely nuts. So I've heard people getting back 20 hours a week with a commute. So I think it's a great thing. That's finally kind of the penny has dropped for companies, and long may it kind of continue.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in a number of ways. One, not just how we view the workforce in general, but just how we view economics. And a lot of the companies that I think that are sort of thriving during this period are ones that have been forward thinking, and it's not so much they're trying to cut positions or their bottom line or trying to save money just based on what they see on paper. It's more projecting, we don't know what the impact of this is going to be long term. And so because of that, we need to build in a certain amount of flexibility and try some new things. And there's more innovation coming out of it now as well. And I mean, I just I feel like I'm able to be more creative because as you said, you remove all of those stresses that you would normally have when you go to work, and you're in a more peaceful environment where you can kind of juggle a couple of things at once, but there's no stress involved with it. So
and another point one of my customers actually made is that she's working from home full time now at the moment, and maybe with a view to being back in the office at some stage in the future for maybe a day or maybe 2 days or something like that. But she also said she's benefiting greatly from the lack of people kind of popping their head in the office door and, oh, hey, how are you? How was your weekend? You multiply that about, like, it's nice to be social, but you multiply that like 6, 8, 10 times in a day, or 10 little micro conversations. Suddenly, you lose the time, and you also lose your concentration, and it's kind of it's kind of interesting. It's a nice little mix, but certainly I think that's one of the I know the pandemic's been terrible. A lot of people lost their lives, so it's a serious thing, and I never downplay it. But if we're to look for some kind of positive out of it, I think that is a kind of a positive. So let's talk a little bit about your background, Tim, because I think it's kind of really interesting that. Especially in the times we're in now, we're in very, very, turbulent times, let's say, especially in North America, with, a lot of anti-racial stuff going on. I definitely have spoken to you in the past about your perspectives on gun violence in the US, and I know you have some very well articulated views on that. Hence you decided to take the plunge and actually write a book about it, which is awesome. I'll try and include the link in this video to the book. Tell us a little bit about your background and your journey in the US and ending up in Canada, and the different environments you've kind of lived in.
Yes, it's been an interesting journey, to say the least. I was born in Warsaw, New York, which is a small town in upstate. It's about an hour and a half south of the U.S.-Canadian border. So I grew up around that area until I was around 10 years old. And it's very rural. It's very blue collar. Farming was the main industry. So it was a lot of, it was a simple way of life, I guess you would say. And then my father, most of the time when I was a kid, he was a minister. So he started off as a Baptist minister, and then he got into a youth minister. So religion was always a big part of our lives as well. And when I was around 10 years old, he decided that he wanted to go back to school. And the only place that he thought would be a landing spot for him was a Christian university that was in Tennessee. So we moved down there, and I'm the oldest of four siblings. So my two younger brothers and my younger sister, we all packed up and moved down there. And I lived in Tennessee until I graduated high school, so 18 years old. Oh, I think I lost your audio there, Alan.
Gotcha. I'm back now. Well,
Yeah.
I actually I muted myself so the screen wouldn't pop over to me. How old were you when you moved to Tennessee?
I was about 10 years old.
Okay, so
Yeah.
old enough to understand what's going on.
Yeah, and it's a very different dynamic as well, and that's kind of people tell me all the time I don't sound like I have an accent, and I think that's because I started off with the northern accent, and then I got a southern one, and my theory is they just canceled each other out. So I ended up
Bit
neutral.
of a weird mix, weird hybrid.
Yeah, but yeah, it's a. I mean, I still say before I moved to Tennessee, or before I moved to Canada rather, I still felt like Tennessee was much more home to me than New York ever was.
Okay, that's interesting.
And it's just the environment. Like, I mean, they're decent people. They're very community focused. Everything is about, how can I help out my neighbor and that kind of thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so it's a great place to grow up, and that's sort of how I got into this strange dynamic with the guns, and we can touch on that more later on. But
yeah.
Is that you see these people that on the surface they seem so wholesome, right? And they're very religious, and they're very inspired by community, and they want to build things up and be nice to each other. But at the same time, they can also harbor views on things like race and guns and sexuality and stuff like that seem to be completely contradictory to that nice person that right?
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting paradigm to live through that, and to see the switch just.
That is interesting. I mean, and would it be? And again, it's just me from my observational perspective. Is it a thing that you mentioned two things about those people would be that they're very much into community. So it tells me that they like to know who they live with in their community. They like tight-knit communities, and it's probably a case of Bob knows Bill knows Jane and stuff like that, and everybody helps each other.
Yeah.
So right. It's a little bit very inclusive, but kind of exclusive in a way, and not really probably a little bit closed in terms of physically closed, in terms of environmental, and probably then sounds like maybe a little bit perhaps mentally closed to outside and more liberal ways of thinking and the stuff that's going on in the outside world. Would that be a fair point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why you see some of the stuff that's playing out in the news now with, Confederate flags and statues and all that kind of thing is they're very proud on the heritage that they come from, which is not necessarily a bad thing on the surface, but when it permeates into every single thing that you do in life, and you're not willing to move off of that spot, it makes it very difficult to progress as a society, right?
Absolutely. And from a fundamental perspective, my view would be, when the kind of the basking or the bathing or the celebratory kind of, actions of those old glories, of the Confederacy or whatever it was, that would be absolutely fine if it didn't hurt so many black people,
absolutely.
It didn't, poke a finger in the wound of slavery.
Right.
It would be fine. Go there. Celebrate what you want to celebrate would be my perspective on it. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But when it hurts other people, and that's what we teach. Well, that's what I teach my kids, and that's what I think most decent people teach their kids. Oh, it's okay to have fun with people. Yeah, but don't make fun. Don't hurt people, or don't make fun of people, or don't be kind, I suppose, So so when you were so you lived there from 10 years old until you finished high school. So very formative years you spent there. You're a teenager, you're a young man, you're coming into your teens. So how did that affect your view on the world, do you think? I mean, because I would see as somebody who's quite a an open and liberal perspective on a lot of things. So how do you think that formulated your kind of your progressive way of thinking?
What's interesting, Alan, and I tell people this all the time, just in conversation, is, and I don't mean it to sound anecdotal. It really has meaning for me. I say that Canada saved my life in this regard, in that when during those formative years, when you're only getting one perspective and you're only getting one way of thinking and one way of doing things, I have no doubt that if I would have remained there and lived out my life in Tennessee, I'd be a different person than I am now. But it's being exposed to so many different things once I
It's
decided to come
fascinating.
here.
Actually, that's a fascinating thought. You
Yeah.
know, that you can have that you have the kind of retrospective nuance to know that, you know, you could have just kind of gone along that path and you would have just stayed in that path because you were so kind of ingrained and the culture was ingrained in you. I mean,
Right.
what was the catalyst? What was physically the catalyst that made you kind of move out of that environment? Was it serendipity, or what way did that happen?
No, it was very simplistic actually. So I grew up from the time I was probably 6, 7 years old, playing football, American football, and it was kind of like a lineage for us. My dad played university football, my grandfather played, so it was sort of like a rite of passage for men in our family to do that. And my dad started training me and getting me interested from a very young age. So when I played football in middle school, high school, and everything. And then I had a scholarship. Actually, I was going to go to the University of Miami and play football for them. And my senior year in high school, I was playing a game and I ended up having a really bad accident. I broke a bone in my back. And then through that recovery period, I sort of realized my interest in writing, and I used it more as a therapeutic tool. To try and get out like all of these feelings and emotions and things that I was going through during that recovery. And I think that was maybe the catalyst to starting to open my mind a little bit more, just because I realized at that point that I didn't have an identity per se, right? Like I was a football player. That's all I knew. So I couldn't identify with, like, you know, I didn't know what I wanted to study as a major when I went to school. I didn't know where I wanted to live. I didn't know like anything other than what I've been taught in terms of socio impact. So it was really one of those kind of aha moments where I figured out, you know, if you take away this thing that you identify with and it's no longer there, then what are you at your
Yes.
core?
What's
And I
left?
didn't know.
Yeah.
Right.
So that injury was a huge catalyst in your life for change. Like it
Correct.
literally
Yeah.
changed. You're literally changed your direction. You were just heading down this particular path. You know, playing football, going to play football, heading off to play football, and just bang, you're stopped in your tracks and just totally had to reevaluate everything. And what
That's
came
right.
out of that then? What was the result of that? Did you, you know, like, I'm not saying you woke up one morning and says, now I know who I am. But I mean, you know,
Oh,
how did that play out?
I think it started me down a path to being more inquisitive,
Mm.
more like asking questions about things, not just taking stuff at face value all the time, wanting to further my education and understanding that, like, you can educate yourself in non-formal ways. Like there's nothing that stops you from going to a library and
Yeah, go
looking stuff
read.
up,
Yeah,
or
sure.
or looking things up online. I
Yeah,
mean, it depends on what source you're using as to
yeah,
what you trust, but
yeah, true.
um, it just started a kind of a snowball effect of, like, you know, if this is taken from me, but I can find something positive out of it, then what else in my life can I do the same thing with, right?
Got it.
And that kind of, I mean, I ended up moving out here, one, because of, I guess, shame in a way. Is I felt a little bit, you know, I didn't want to be that guy where I'm 40, 50 years old and I'm in a supermarket, and because everybody's so close knit and they grew up together, somebody recognizes me and says, like, hey, you're so and so, whatever happened to blah blah blah.
Got
And
it.
I didn't want to be in that position, right?
But are you telling me that, which kind of fascinating, that, and I got this vision in my brain, you know, of you in that supermarket when you're 50 years old and somebody saying, "Oh, you that guy?" Are you telling me that that was an actual cognitive thing for you? That, you know, when you were going through university and stuff like that, you were kind of trying to figure out, you know, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? You know, what I want to be. That played a part in that. That you figured out, well, I need to remove myself from this very closeted physical environment and place to kind of grow as a human being. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
100%, 100%. Yeah.
Mm.
So I thought like, I mean, initially, I wanted to go to, it was always my dream to study at Oxford in UK. And it was ever since I was like a younger kid, 10, 11 years old, I'd watch people give speeches or lectures there or something. And it just always seemed like such a magical place for education. So initially that's what I wanted to do. And then I started thinking, you know what, like all of my family lives in the States. If something happens, God forbid, or there's an emergency, any that kind of thing, on a student budget, am I able to get back in time? Or like if there's an emergency, can I do that, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't think that I could. So I remember my father, there's a I don't remember the name of it, but there's a very large Baptist church around the airport in Toronto. And my father had taken us there on a ministry trip when I was a kid. And I just remember having a great time. And it was like so many people and different shades of people and different cultures. And like, it was just seemed so fun. So I thought, you know, like I can start over in a different country, but still be close enough to get back if I wanted to.
Yes.
And this was the only experience up until that point that I've had internationally. So why not take a leap and try up there? So.
And so when you, and that's kind of really interesting as well. So your initial exposure to Toronto, you know, when your dad, you know, had it, as you said, a mission trip, was you kind of, you drank in that kind of very cosmopolitan feel of which it has, you know, and I'm not sure whether insiders realize that and understand that. Certainly me as an outsider, you know, having visited Toronto for over the years, like over the last 25 years, it has that kind of cosmopolitan feel. It just has that kind of multicultural, multinational feel, which is great. You kind of drink that up. So you felt that, and that had an impact on you. And that was the antithesis to where you were living in Tennessee. And this was now big city, lots of people, lots of black people, brown people, white people, whatever. You got that's what had the impact on you and made you kind of fall in love with it.
Yeah, I think it was just being exposed to diversity for the first time in my life. Diversity of color, of religion, of thought, of perspective. Like there's just so many different things that I wasn't getting where I grew up, and I gravitated towards that because I was, you know, I'm in this stage of wanting to learn and to soak up information, and there's no better place to do that than when you get in this big melting pot of so many different things, right?
Yeah, I've actually heard it described as that before. It's literally a melting pot.
Yeah, and for someone like me, I mean, I went through high school all 4 years, and I think I maybe saw 2 or 3 people of color the whole time. So it was such a, like, I mean,
wow.
You think about it in simplistic terms like that, but it's not just you're not getting those experiences, but like you're not getting that culture, you're not getting that cuisine.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a huge problem, and that's an endemic problem. I think that has the United States at the kind of, you know, at this very kind of important crossroads. And you know, it's if you live in a, you know, if you live in a white neighborhood in a white town and you don't see black people, you don't get the opportunity to mix with people of color, you don't understand their culture, you just don't get exposed to it. So you obviously are, you know, have a very, you know, inward way of thinking in terms of race and culture and stuff like that, you know. And I think that's obviously, and the result of that is then we're all in our own little bubbles, and those who aren't open, and that causes problems. Then they just want to stay in the little bubble. You can see it so much with the divisive nature of the states at the moment. You can just see the people who are just in their bubbles, and I can nearly see well, I can not that I can nearly see, I can see fear and loathing on a lot of these faces of people who are frankly, you know, racist or afraid or ignorant or whatever. You can see kind of fear, literally fear and loathing. They don't know what's in front of them, and they fear it, and they just loathe it because they just don't know it.
Yeah, there's a book that I read recently by Douglas Murray, and he came up with the hypothesis that the whole Trump phenomenon, how he described it, was more of it's like a death throw for white culture, right? And we're in this period where, you know, when you back an animal into a corner, it only has one opportunity to do something, right? It has to lash out, it has to roll around, it has to fight back. Exactly, right?
yeah.
And so I think whether or not like they realize what created that feeling of being in the corner or not, we're seeing that reaction. And
Yes.
it's very easy to say, like, you know, that's why you see when they have conversations about, you know, gay rights and segregation,
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
It's very easy to just say, you know, gay people just want the rights that everybody else has, for
Yes.
example. But to somebody that's growing up on the opposite side of that conversation, you'll hear them say a lot of buzzwords like they want everything, or they want more, or they
Got
want,
it.
and
That's the
their
fear.
perspective.
That's that fear button, isn't it? You can
Right.
stoke that fear. They want everything. They want to take over. It's like the it makes me think of some of the pieces I've written, or sorry, I've read over the last while about when you know when Juneteenth happened, and
Mhm.
the Emancipation Act was passed and slaves were in inverted commas freed, and I was very I hold up my hands and ashamedly admit that I was very ignorant of a lot of history, a lot of Black history and U.S. history until
Mhm.
the last month or two. And my
Right.
25-year-old daughter said something to me or in our family a while ago, and it resonated with me. She said, "Right now," she said, "this is probably the biggest single teaching moment and learning moment in the civilization of human
That's true.
beings." Because
Yeah.
on a mass scale, because of social media and the reach of the internet, on a
Mhm.
mass scale, everybody is saying, I need to understand, I need to learn. And you know, the information is there for us to learn. She said it's the single biggest teaching moment, you know, in the existence of kind of human beings. It's not learned over time or evolution, it's now.
Right.
So I learned about Tulsa, you know, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the Tulsa massacre, where I think it was 130, 150 Black people were
Mhm.
killed, and the whole town was burnt down because I suppose fundamentally is probably lots of different layers, but fundamentally, as I believe it, it was like there was a booming and thriving Black community which had come out of emancipation, realized, okay, the strength in us, and we can do well. And they were doing very, very well. I think there was a place called Black Wall Street and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
it was the white population there who were probably stoked with what you just said a few minutes ago, which was they're going to take everything. You know, they're going to take. It's not. Oh, they're not just going to take the share. They're going to take everything. They're going to take over, and it's pushing that fear button in people. That so elicits a horrible and oftentimes tragic and in that case a murderous kind of response.
Mhm.
So that's kind of really interesting. You bring that up, you know.
And the interesting thing that I find for me, and I agree with what your daughter said, is if you look at just the political dynamic in the States right now, we're very polarized on both sides, right? And it's not as bad as Canada. We have a left and a right, but it's not nearly to the scale that it is in the States. But you'll find a lot of people that are on the right, for example, more conservative-minded people, Southern people. They'll say things like liberals are always after Trump, right? They always want to get him on something. They want to show that he's a bad guy, blah blah blah. And the reality of that is, it's not so much that we are or those people are after him as a person. It's that we're on this precipice as a society right now, and we have to decide, you know, the things that we valued before, that we used to stand for, that people knew America as. These things are eroding, and they're not eroding organically. It's systematically being eroded purposefully, right? And it's one of those things where we have to decide, like, you know, are we okay with going down that path and appealing to our lesser angels, or this is
Yes.
an opportunity for us to understand, like, you know, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this is completely contrary to everything that we
Yeah.
stand for, and
Yeah.
we have to do something about it.
You know, it's fascinating, and you know, touched on Trump, and it was inevitable he would come into the conversation somewhere, because I
Yeah.
have read a lot of stuff you post online, and I must say I am interested in reading and digesting what you say, because there's a richness to what you say, and you're not just you know, a vacuous chamber spewing out hate or, you know, bullshit. To be honest, you're interested in having a conversation, which I admire that, and I think that's what it's all about. rather than just calling people names and stuff like that. You're happy to kind of engage with people and say, okay, let's listen to your perspective and let me articulate why I think that's wrong, which is great. Right. So I definitely admire that. And I think that's great. And I think we need more of that. You can see online now that a lot of people, excuse me, will just kind of spew kind of, there's a lot of name calling, shaming. It's just very, very, as I said, short term, quick hit type conversations, and it doesn't do anything for anybody. It's just, for me, it's just like throwing, another stone over the fence and hitting somebody on the head, and you'll get one back,
Right.
Whereas I think if you want to, a friend of mine in Ireland a few years back, a long time ago, she said to me, Liz Keach, she said to me, we weren't talking about anything in particular, but we used to have these great conversations about stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she said to me, you know what, Alan, she said, the problem in society today, and like this is 10, 12 years ago, she says, people have lost the art of conversation to have an argument. An argument is not meant to be a nasty, bad thing. It's just an argument. It's just you have
or to be taken personally.
Correct. You have a point of view. I have a counterpoint of view. Let me explain my point of view to help you understand my perspective. Maybe change your mind, maybe not change your mind, and I'm okay with that. And let me listen. The second part is really important. Let me listen to your perspective. So let me give you the respect. You give me the respect. It's mutual. We meet in the middle. We may walk away with the same views we had before. However, we'll have been impacted by the richness of the other person's argument. And again, it doesn't have to be a nasty argument. And she says human beings, in the general sense, I've kind of lost that. She said people just very quickly a switch goes off and people get angry and call names. And I do feel that, and I see people of your genre, in terms of the way you communicate online, and you can pick them out and say, well, that person wants dialogue. They want to talk. They want to listen. They will make their points. You're no idiot. You'll make your point, and you'll use facts, and you'll use intelligence to do that. So you're nobody's fool, but you're willing to engage in discourse. And I think that's missing from a huge swath of the U.S. landscape at the moment.
Yeah,
it's so.
I completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree, and that's, I think, sometimes why maybe I'm given a little bit more rope in discussions with people that I disagree with. Is one, I hope that I put forth that perspective, that I'm not there to tell people they're dumb or to put them down or to step on them in any way. Firstly, but secondly, I think just going through the life journey that I've been through, if anybody is going to be able to change their mind on anything, it should be me, right? So, like, because I've had that experience, I know that it's possible to go to that point, right? I mean, a perfect example I use all the time is I respect, as I said, my dad was a minister growing up, and I respect the people that believe in faith and have their traditions, but because I was so much of a fundamentalist religious person, I became an atheist.
Got it.
Because I couldn't, again, just asking questions and trying to figure out, is this the actual way of doing things? You open your mind up to so many different possibilities. And I think that when we have conversations and people say to me, this seems very closed-minded, or you haven't thought this out, or you're not listening to the other side, I can illustrate to be listen.
You can actually go, hold on a second. Let me tell you the journey I've made. Because I mean, in terms of in life in general, if you've made a a physical journey in your life, and you've also made some of these layered journeys, which are kind of probably even deeper. To have your father's a minister, so you had this fundamental Christian upbringing. And I'm born a Roman Catholic, and my father was probably as near to a minister as you would get. We hadn't got ministers in the Catholic Church, but if you could have had ministers, my father would have been a minister. He ministered the sick. He went to church every single day. He preached. Preached the gospel. Revered the Pope. All that stuff. And also sprinkled holy water on us every single night when we were in bed. Right.
Oh. So at this age, you are a holy man.
I've had that, and I made that journey myself, and then at a certain stage in my life, I was like, click, no, and I'm an atheist. But I think for you've had that journey from a cultural perspective, from a place in Tennessee, which you said, there was just some problematic ways in terms of how society was set up there that just didn't suit your thinking, and then to end up then being in a much more multicultural place, an open place, and then you have the religious part of it as well. So I feel like you've made several kind of journeys in your lifetime, spiritually and physically and culturally. So I think for anybody, but maybe they wouldn't know that if they were debating with you on Facebook. Maybe they would be thinking, well, what would you know? So, I just wonder how many times you actually pull the card and say, well, actually, let me tell you.
To be honest, so the response I get more often than not is, wait, don't you live in Canada? Which I'm not sure the relevance of that. I think
the relevance of that is you're a US brother, but you left us. You're gone, so you don't have any rights.
So now I don't get an opinion.
You don't hear your opinion. I'm still a citizen. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You don't hear.
No.
You don't want your mail-in ballots.
I tell them this all the time. I said, I hope you have the same conversation with the men and women that serve our country, because when they go overseas, they don't get an opinion anymore either. So you might as well tell them the same thing.
That's a very good point. So let's talk a little bit about your kind of, what you, and I'm not asking you to predict the future, whatever's going to happen or what you're going to do, but from your perspective, just looking at, what's going on in the States at the moment, and I hope it's a seminal moment. I do. I always have a little fear that there's been upheavals, riots, trouble, assassinations, and stuff like that in terms of racial conflict over the years in the US, and hasn't really changed. Personally, I feel the fact that President Trump, or Trump is president, I should say, that Trump is president right now, and that in itself has been so polarizing and divisive. Mm-hmm. I think society in the States has reached a kind of a seminal moment. And I do feel when you have the likes of, I could be wrong, who knows, when you have the likes of FedEx saying, to the Washington Redskins, phone call,
change your name, yeah.
I mean, they're kind of big, they're seismic moves. Now, the cynic may say, well, it's all about money. Well, so what? It's a change. That's the way I feel about it. It's a change. If it's money, if it's pressure, if it's whatever, and you have these things happening, and then you have other kind of seminal moments that I've seen as well, where you have, Esper, the defense secretary, and I think Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so the top soldier and the top defense person in the country, a few weeks ago saying, yes, we have 10 U.S. military installations that are named after Southern generals and whatever, and yes, we are open to a discussion about that. They feel the need, because of the tone of the moment, to come out and communicate that on behalf of the army, nearly saying, and to the detriment of their relationship with Trump, because there's no way he was happy with that.
No.
It's nearly them saying, and Milley also made the point, I didn't know I was walking across to that church. I didn't know that was a photo op. And so did Esper. So I'm not saying these people are great people, by the way, I don't know them. I'm just reading what they kind of, the statements they made, and how they're playing how they're playing the game right now. And I feel one way they're playing the game is that they're letting people know that they're not on, they're not like sitting beside Trump and saying, yeah, let's ignore these people and let's put soldiers in the street and all that stuff. So they're letting people know that there's a bigger, the country is a bigger entity than just one man, just because he's president, So those types of things, the FedEx thing, and stuff like that is and even NASCAR. And I don't know a lot about NASCAR. And it might be silly to even have this opinion on it, but the fact that you know, NASCAR is a bastion of Southern culture and stuff like that. And to kind of go, right, let's take the flag away. Mississippi just voted to take the Confederate flag away. Statues coming down all over the place. I don't know. How do you, my question really is, how do you feel? Do you feel this is a heavy moment, a seminal moment, a moment of change? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely things that are going on that, I mean, at least as far as in my lifetime, I haven't seen before, and those are promising things. I think we'll probably know a lot more come November, just to see, you know, right now as Trumpism shrinks and his base shrinks, and it becomes more and more extreme. In a way, the silver lining to that is that before we knew that we had things like racism and homophobia and all of the stuff that we don't want in our culture, but we didn't know exactly how much of it was out there, right? These were all people that were under rocks, that they had views that they kept to themselves or they kept in their own community, and we weren't aware of what was going on. So the silver lining of the Trump phenomenon is now there's a light on them, right? Now we know how many racists there are. We know that these things that we're still struggling to come to terms with, we're still struggling to make right. We still have a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of stuff that has to be done, and it's systematic. It's things that like generational as well. And I mean, I'm optimistic that we get there eventually. I'm not sure what the impact of, I think that the impact of Trump as president will be felt generations after this, whether he gets a second term or not. It's just that mentality that's been exposed, that's been cultivated, that now he's reinforcing all of the negative that we are, right? The worst of us.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of a great point, that it probably is there will be a generational effect in terms of this presidency. I think and I totally agree with you in terms of it has exposed a lot of prejudice that was definitely out there, as you said, hiding under rocks and stuff like that. So it's made those people come to the fore and and show themselves, which is actually a good thing. It's actually that's a really good thing, because now when you see the lady in Central Park who called the police on the black gentleman who was board watching, when you see now that she's going to be charged with wasting the police time or something like that, that's a whole turn. You know, that's a whole 180 on what would normally happen. So things like that kind of give me hope that, you know, society and hopefully the people in power. And again, I'm no idiot. You know, I know power is, you know, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So I know I'm not naive, but I feel things like that where, you know, even DAs and people that are making decisions, they're cultural decisions they're making, I feel, because I don't think they have to charge that lady. But what they're doing is they're saying, here's what happened. We're going to charge you, and let this be a warning to other people who are calling us to say a black man is threatening my life, when in fact he wasn't. It was a lie. Right. So you're using and weaponizing. So she was using and weaponizing the police against the black community in a microcosm. You know, at the time it was tiny, but I thought it had vast kind of resonances and implications, because that's what obviously people have been doing for years, as you said, but it just hasn't been called out. Now we have mobile phones, we have cameras, and people can just go, "Oh, you want to behave like a racist, you know, asshat? Here, hang on, I'm going to record you. Now we're going to share it, and then you're going to lose your job, and then you might be." And so this is huge. And those types of things, I feel, are really interesting in a shift in culture.
Right, and isn't it fascinating that those videos never seem to go the other way?
No.
No. Everybody has a camera. Everybody has access to those sorts of things. You never see black cops beating up white people, it never happens in reverse.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
So I haven't seen it. I think as well that you know, the fact that a lot of when Trump has been in office, a lot of the stuff he's done is just overtly terribly racist or far right. Even to him complaining about the Washington Redskins changing their name just this week, and you know,
the July 4th speech he just
July
gave,
4th speech was one of the most, God, it's got to be one of the most divisive. It's probably going to go down as one of the most divisive presidential speeches of all time. I mean, it's and you're right. It's only after maybe when Trump is finished, and there's a hangover and there's a period of time to kind of get back to whatever normal is, that people will looking back and kind of go, hang on a second, oh, there was this. There's been so many incidents. But I want to put you on the spot and ask you, that's only a guess, it's a coin toss. So what are your feelings in terms of Trump getting a second term? Do you think come November, with COVID-19, it's probably going to be at least 150,000 people dead in the United States? The virus is being handled really badly. It was like he used it as a kind of a soundbite and a PR thing until he got bored. He's totally undermined his task force all the time. So, you can point squarely at the lack of leadership there for suppressing the curve on the virus.
Right.
Biggest recession, obviously, in many, many years. You can't blame the recession directly on Trump, but I think it's all tied up in his
ignorance.
His ignorance, yeah, and his lack of leadership.
Right.
So come November, people go to the polls, and we know people are going to vote for Trump. Like that's whatever, 60 million people voted for him before. So what's your call? Is it too early to call? Do you think there's something might happen between then and now that could affect it? How do you feel if you were put on the spot to say, will he get a second term?
I would like to say that it would be impossible. But one thing I learned that led to his first term is that you can never underestimate the American people and their ability to do the wrong thing when the time calls for it. So I would want to be optimistic. I think right now, I mean, you can look at a number of poll results and things of that nature. We saw the same sorts of numbers when he was running against Hillary, and look how that turned out. So it's very, it's dicey, I think. Yeah. I would like to think that he's alienated more people than he's brought on board during this presidency, and then that will have an impact. I would like to think that he would have little, if no, support cyberly from Russia this time around.
Yes.
Yes. But who knows if those things happen?
Yeah, well, we don't know.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, just from my perspective, I try not to be I try to have an open mind, even in terms of politics. I mean, I can say that I'm more liberal minded on the majority of things, but I try not to put myself into a category one way or the other, just because I think each individual topic will allow you some space, some real estate to think through things, right?
Yeah.
So I might be more fiscally conservative and more culturally liberal, and what have you, based on the topic. But the thing that bothers me about the left now, or at least the extreme side of it, is I think they need to get more of a handle on the cancel culture, politically incorrect sort of mantra that's going around.
Yeah.
And it's detrimental for a number of reasons, but mostly it's the only way that we can come to any sort of reconciliation or to move forward is to have dialogue and to have conversation and to share ideas, right? And sometimes you're going to share ideas that are going to be bad, and sometimes you're going to have a bad opinion or a bad way to look at things, but you only find out that that's bad by giving it a voice, right?
I agree.
You keep it to yourself,
that's
there's no way to judge it. So I don't think it's helpful when a celebrity or a sports person or something of that nature says something wrong in the moment or flips up a conversation, something like that, and then their career goes away, right?
Yeah, I think I agree. I totally agree with you on this point. It's a very it's a kind of a very precarious time, because everybody advocates for free speech, but then if somebody articulates a view in the incorrect way, and and cancel culture gets a hold of that, or people on the the extreme left get a hold of that, or something like that, it's easy these days to gang up on people online, which it's kind of good and bad, right? Because it's good because it helps us educate ourselves and communicate dynamically and quickly, and get news and stuff like that really, very quickly. But it also
Right.
allows us to, or allows some types of people, and even trolls, a lot of trolls out there who are just really interested in taking people down. And I
Right.
think it's not always the best thing to do. And I think people can make mistakes. Now, I'm not saying that people who do really bad things in their lives should be forgiven. But I think, I do agree with you in terms of the kind of, the sensitivity being just too tightly wound up that people's lives could be ruined and stuff like that. So you got to be careful. And I do also agree with you that if you have a society where there's such extreme polarity between left and right, like extreme, that's not a good thing, because then you just have them in their camp and you in your camp, or vice versa. And you're right, you don't really want to have dialogue. And that means you don't want to listen to dialogue. I think in the earlier part of our conversation, we said and I said about you, it's so important to listen to and I'm trying so much to learn lately. I'm not interested in listening to people espousing hate, racism. I'm not interested in that. But I want to be interested in people saying, talking about, giving an opinion on something. And I'll give you a very quick instance before we kind of wrap it up. Dundas is I'm not sure whether you've seen what's been going on there, but I think Dundas was a Scottish parliamentarian. I think he inserted a word in the Slavery Act. I don't know the exact details here, so I'm gonna play only partial knowledge. But I think what he did was, he didn't advocate to abolish it. He advocated to gradually abolish it over time. And I think it was a political ploy, or a political kind of, I suppose, a deal he did to get something kind of true or something like that. Anyway, and I think this is Dundas, and if I'm wrong, somebody can call me in the comments. But anyway, so this guy has a history, and then there's a lot of people are saying, well, let's rename Dundas. And then there's a lot of people who live in Dundas are saying, well, no, we love Dundas and it's their town, So, but I think you should have a dialogue, but I can see there's people who want to keep the name. Some people call the other, oh, you're just snowflakes and you're cancel culture. Some people on the other side saying, racist, this, that, so it's just the real extremes. I want to kind of, for me, I like to pull things in a bit, more into focus, so we can kind of listen to each other, and sure, maybe decisions made that won't make everybody happy. But if I walk away from something and I've lost an argument, I'm okay if you've listened to me. And I'm okay if I've listened to you and I've understood you. I'm okay with that. The loss is okay. It doesn't feel like a loss. I now understand where you're coming from. I might not agree with you. And I think has to be the way. It can't be, let's kill the other side. Not saying anyone wants to kill anybody, but maybe some people do. But let's kill the other side, pummel them into the ground so they no longer exist. Well, that's not going to happen, right? That's not going to happen, especially in the United States. So,
and in a way, like, sorry to cut you off, but similar to what you said earlier, is because we've gotten to that place and we're at this precipice of trying to determine what our identity is going forward. You asked what was different about now than maybe previous things before. We've seen protests before. We've seen civil rights before. I think the ability and the willingness for people to listen is different. And I think their ability to get involved personally.
Yes,
great point. You see when you see a Black Lives Matter protest, right? It's not just Black people. It's all people that are going there, right?
You've made a great point. That's a huge difference. And I think, on a micro level, it's calling out, that kind of culture. So it's on a micro level. If someone in your family inadvertently or says something that doesn't quite, sound right or whatever, it's kind of calling them out and saying, you shouldn't say it like that, or you shouldn't think, or whatever. Just challenge and teach and listen. I think that's huge. I've seen a lot. I live in a particularly kind of white neighborhood, and it's just heard people kind of say things like, well, don't in a very passive way, don't all lives matter? And I have my kind of I'm ready, and I don't aggressively attack people, but I'll say they do, absolutely. But the thing is, all lives have always mattered So it's even kind of ridiculous to have to say that. Well, of course, if you're a human being, all lives matter. However, we're looking after the Black lives because they haven't mattered as much over the last few hundred years. And it's now our turn to help them more than anybody else.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we've had our white privilege. So it's just kind of trying to insert that idea into somebody's brain, I think is hopefully in some way helpful.
Yeah, and I've heard an analogy about that recently, where somebody said, you know, when we try and save the rainforest, we're not saying that all forests don't matter and only the rainforest matters. We're just saying the rainforest is endangered right now, and we have to do something about it.
Do we love all the rest of those trees around the world? Yes, we do. Well, listen, it's been amazing talking to you. It's been great. It's been, your story is so fascinating, I must say, and as I said, multi-layered in terms of all those interlaced journeys. So it's been great to talk to you, and thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. And I hope to speak to you again soon.
Sounds good, and thank you so much for the conversation, Alan. I really enjoyed it as well.
It's awesome. Thank you. Take care.
Take
Tim.
care of yourself. You as well.
Have a good one. Take care. Bye.